Hi and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement show. I'm the host, Philip Heitzen, and today I have a really insightful interview with Jonathan Grant and Ben Szostek, two senior leaders within the procurement group at Newell Brands. And Jonathan and Ben have been on a journey to bring advanced analytics capabilities to Newell Brands delivered through a Centre of Excellence model. And so in today's discussion, we talk about some of the tactics they use, from clean sheet costing and cost modelling to negotiation fact packs, which is actually a concept that I really like. You'll also hear examples of different sources of data that they use, the skill sets necessary to build out a team like this, and how advanced analytics are actually being applied to both direct and indirect areas of spend. Before I start the show, I'd like to thank my friends at ProcureCon. They connected me with Ben and Jonathan, and Ben and Jonathan will both be sharing more of their journey at the inaugural ProcureCon Direct conference. That's going to be in San Diego. In fact, the beautiful city of La Jolla, just outside San Diego, on August the 14th and August the 15th. So for more information about ProcureCon Direct, I'll include a link in the show notes. And then finally, if you're a procurement leader that doesn't have access to the subject matter expertise or the market intelligence that you really need to make a difference across all of the categories you buy, I'd love to have a chat about PalmBridge with you. Just this week we helped a CPO benchmark his contingent labour programme, for example. And the model at PalmBridge has been built to enable you to take advantage of a hybrid in-source and outsource delivery model so that you retain all those stakeholder relationship management, but you actually leverage the expertise and know-how from across our ecosystem when you actually need that extra help. You don't pay for things that you don't need. Okay, let's go straight into the show.
Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Heitzen. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
So hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement. And today I'm joined by John Grant and Ben Szostek of Newell Brands. And as I mentioned in my intro, Ben and John are both senior directors within Newell Brands' procurement team. So, John, Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Philip. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks. And I have a question for both of you, just so that listeners can get to know you a little bit more. I just wondered, and perhaps Ben, if you could answer first, just randomly pick on you first. How did you get into procurement?
Yeah, so I got into procurement kind of in a roundabout way through multiple functions. I received my degree in marketing, worked in marketing for 6 to 8 months, and then moved over into an operations role. Really enjoyed the operations side of the business. Moved into a supply chain role, and then co-led a large make versus buy project with the procurement leadership at the time, and really fell in love with the function. And coming out of that project, worked my way into procurement and haven't looked back since. That was about 12 years ago.
Interesting. John, how about you? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Well, I have an eerily similar pathway into procurement as Ben, also having a degree in marketing and also one in decision sciences. I began my career in an injection molding facility in Wisconsin as a production and material planner, and quickly found a knack for dealing with complex relationships, both internally and externally. That bridged into various other roles within supply chain and eventually led into spending several months over in India helping resolve some supplier startup issues. Coming back from that after demonstrating, I think, what was viewed as a really high tolerance for supply chain pain, I was asked by our head of procurement at the time if I'd be interested in a category manager role. And similar to Ben, haven't looked back since. And the pain still remains, but the rewards are pretty high.
Whereabouts in India were you based? I'm interested in that because I spent about a year of my career in India as well.
All of our project work was being done in Bangalore. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a nice area, just going back and forth between a factory. But we went over to the ports in Chennai, working through some logistical issues, and yeah, it was quite the experience. Set up warehousing and did all kinds of other things.
Yeah, I was based in Chennai for a year, and it's one of those experiences that I was so thankful for. You experience so many different things that you could never experience if you're based in the UK or the US. But I think it really made an impression on me for the rest of my career.
It shapes you as a person.
Exactly.
For sure.
And you both actually said that you had a marketing background. I'm always interested because I've got a little bit of a marketing background as well. I did marketing as part of my business degree. What do you think we could learn as a profession in terms of how we position or brand ourselves? When you put your marketing hat on, perhaps, building stakeholder loyalty, for example, because I think that's sometimes something that we miss, when we just get kind of into our procurement. We put our procurement glasses on. We don't necessarily focus on how we sell or market ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I would answer that in two different ways. The first being, I think having an experience and a background on the marketing side of the business has really helped me as a procurement professional. And really because I think in procurement, we have a tendency to try to sell ideas to the business using our metrics and things that we care about. And then we wonder why marketing isn't as excited as we are. And so I think that having that background has really taught me to pitch ideas more in their terms, right? Instead of talking about productivity, talk about margin enhancement. And instead of talking about lead time, talk about speed to market. And it's amazing the degree of buy-in you get when you're explaining benefits to your stakeholders in their terms. Right? So I think, that's something we've pushed a lot as we develop our organization to make sure we're pulling folks into procurement that have a wide range of backgrounds and haven't been procurement professionals their whole life, because I think you get pigeonholed and you kind of put the blinders on around what's important. So I think that's been a big piece. And your question about branding, I think, is very timely. We actually had a corporate meeting last week with our procurement leaders talking about we really do need to define our brand because, the way we look at it, if we don't, someone will define it for us, and probably not in the way that we would like it to be defined. So we're really going through that work now on what do we want to be as a procurement group, how do we want to be viewed, and how can we be best supportive of our stakeholders?
Yeah, that's interesting as well, given the fact that our history, where we come from, we always positioned ourselves as it being cost savings alone, and that's the reputation that we got. And then the reputation for perhaps bringing burden rather than bringing value. But it wasn't necessarily that was deliberate, that's just how we evolved. And I definitely see that, those that do a better job in terms of transformation, it's really about focusing on the benefits, as you said before, for our stakeholders, and positioning ourselves as being a little bit more, we can bring a little bit more value to the table than beating up suppliers, which is maybe what we're known for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's critically important that you don't just have a brand, but you live that brand. And every experience with someone within procurement is the same experience, and that people walk away, exactly what you said, with, hey, I got value out of that conversation rather than one more hindrance along the way. And that's really what we're trying to promote here at Newell.
And so for those that don't know about Newell, I knew the name Newell. Honestly, when I started doing some digging, I didn't realize quite the depth and breadth of the brands that fall under your umbrella. So I just wondered if you could share a little bit more about, what falls under Newell Brands, what Newell Brands is made up of.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an eclectic company with some amazing brands. Newell Brands, as it sits today, is a fairly new company formed in 2016 with the combination of Newell Rubbermaid and Jarden. And that resulting organization has annual sales of over $15 billion spread throughout the world, with 60-70% in the U.S. and Canada, but a significant amount of sales outside of the U.S. The consumer products that are part of this group include Mr. Coffee makers, Oster kitchen appliances, Rubbermaid food containers, Sharpie markers, Elmer's glue, outdoor brands such as Marmot and Coleman, scented candles like Yankee Candle and Woodwick, fishing equipment from some of the biggest names out there like Berkeley, Penn, and many other brands, Rawling Sports with baseball bats and gloves, Jostens rings, from championship rings for the Patriots and the Cubs. It's I could go on, and it's really a incredible collection of consumer brands that comes with an immense amount of complexity, given the diversity of those brands. A couple figures I would put on top just to frame up what's going on with those 15 billion is, core sales growth in 2016 was 3.7%. So even with a heavy concentration in the U.S. and we've had great growth globally, and core sales growth that I think would excite anybody with a company our size, and on also over $1 billion of publicly announced synergy savings tied to the combination of the two companies, with such a significant part of that being the responsibility of procurement to deliver. So it's an incredible place to work, and the brands are exciting, the goals are big and meaty, and there's so much work to do in front of us.
So how does that complexity then shape, as a procurement function, how you go about delivering those synergies and how you go about structuring yourself for the business? Because it seems like in an organization like this, there's so much, you said complexity. I'm imagining that a lot of the brands kind of operate as individual businesses. You're one of the few in the company that have that holistic view across everything. Does that shape how you're organized, or do you still look at it more supporting on a brand by brand basis?
No, it absolutely does. And our approach has really been to look at areas that we feel are leverageable across brands, really are right for a center-led structure, and a structure that allows you to use that buying power to your advantage while not losing the kind of the intricate knowledge of each individual business being different. So what we've done is really a hybrid approach where if it's leverageable, we've created a center-led group that's going to drive that. And if it's very specific or a product that is only bought by one brand, we've tried to leave that decision-making where the knowledge base is. So it's really created a hybrid approach through our just a function of the way that the business is set up. We've needed to be flexible in the way that we structured procurement.
Interesting. And I guess it then enables you not necessarily pushing people away from procurement because you're forcing them. If they're in a brand that they only buy, they're the only place that buys that thing. You're not pushing them away because you're requiring them to go through some formal centralized process that may end up with a decision that they don't support. So you're kind of leaving them to do that, I guess, within some boundaries or controls, so you can focus on the areas where you can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And we've learned, through trial and error, don't try to leverage a category that's not leverageable. And that was really our biggest learning the first time around, was there's certain categories that putting them into a center-led structure just doesn't work. They need to be close to the business. They need to be close to the region where the decisions are happening. But if you look at corrugate or MRO or resin, there's obviously a major advantage to centralizing those commodities and using that scale to your advantage.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. So in terms of your journey, you said that you had the first time round. I think I don't know how recently the Center of Excellence was that you've built, so I'm interested in that. I'd just love to know a little bit about how you've evolved, to get to the point where you're in today.
Sure, and I'll start and I'll let John get into a little more detail on the COE piece. So the starting point of this journey was 4 years ago on the Newell legacy side of the business. And really, we were a decentralized procurement structure, really with all procurement decisions made at the divisional level. So like I said, our first step was to move to a center-led model that was category-driven rather than divisional-centric. And really, this allowed us to leverage our scale, like I said, across core commodities and services. As we were doing that, we then layered the analytics function on top of that, really to allow us to have more fact-based negotiations and really a consistent process across our procurement function. That was done just at about the same time that Newell and Jarden merged. And what that allowed us to do was to take that structure that seemed to work and seemed to leverage the right degree of center versus divisional focus. And we're able to pull the two businesses together very quickly and see that leverage fall real fast. I mean, when we put it together and we had one group that suddenly now saw the total scope of what we're buying across commodity categories, the amount of leverage we had with the supply base was astronomical. And by having that analytics group, we were able to go about it in a systematic way and in a way that we felt we weren't leaving money on the table. So we were moving quickly, but I think the structure allowed us to move quickly, really with a confidence level that we were capturing the value we needed to capture.
Yeah, and to build on a bit from Ben's comments, the COE is something that we've more recently formulated, taking kind of the best of what we've had within both organizations and try and create something that really enhances the potential of the procurement organization as a whole. the COE that we're putting together is comprised of really 6 key areas. A project management group, which is chartered with really driving category strategy along with the category leads and providing the resources and the support to drive big initiatives across the group. Your more traditional P2P or procurement execution group that's focused on your indirect processing as well as your overall sourcing events and contract management, those sort of elements. Social compliance, which is such an important part of our organization and just being a good steward. Capability building, both internally as a team and externally from a recruiting standpoint and those sort of things. To supplier development, and then, of course, to Ben's earlier comments, our procurement analytics group, which is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, and why? Because I think that bringing together organizations like Center of Excellence like this is really the way to go, especially when you have a model that's kind of a hybrid. I'm interested how this came to be, or if you had to convince folks that it made sense to centralize some of these activities, in a COE, because obviously there's a cost associated with putting in place a structure like this.
Yeah, I think we're not looking to force anything as we build out and develop the COE, and it's not about ripping out activities that are being done within the business and creating that redundant capability centrally. When you look at like what we do as an analytics team, it's something that's truly value enhancing to our category teams, and it's something that we're definitely not doing today as our core work as a category manager. And when we look at like deploying extremely robust and complete project management for big initiatives, it's something, again, our category managers are not skilled at doing it, then they're not used to doing it, and we may not even want them to do it as category managers. We really want them to manage the suppliers. We want them to execute their projects. We want them to negotiate, solve issues. We don't necessarily want them to be managing timelines and kind of controlling stakeholders across the organization and navigating that complexity. So, I think over time we've tried to remove redundant capabilities and to ensure that everyone's got a unique purpose for being to enhance kind of the value that procurement can deliver. And I think with that being the overarching charter of the COE, I think it's quite easy to build it out. I guess easy is probably the wrong term, but it makes it easier. It's not a matter of, who does what or who does more, who saved what, right? We're a team. And, if we deliver, we win. If we fail, we lose. And, I think you have that right mindset. It's easy to pursue that goal of creating something like it.
Yeah. How did so I think of, maybe your sourcing or your category teams, how did they react to suddenly having this capability available to them? When I've seen it can go one of two ways. One, it can be, there's a lot of support because, a COE can bring things to them that they didn't have the opportunity or the time to do themselves. On the flip side, it could be seen as a threat because, maybe some of these things should be my job and they're now being taken away from me.
Absolutely. And we viewed that as a positive. We went into this really hoping that it was going to drive kind of, I guess you'd call it healthy conflict, right? We wanted there to be a little more pressure applied to the category teams to make sure that they are delivering to the expectations. And so we want, I think you need a different type of mindset to be in the analytics group where you're actually, some regards, you're an internal consultant. And that was on purpose. Or we want them to really push the envelope and push targets to the category teams. So the market is telling us, here's the target, here's what you should be able to go get. Obviously, a category manager, the first thought is, I want to protect my category, and I know it better than anyone else. But once they see that there's also some value being brought to the table by this group, it really works. But I think without some conflict, you're not doing it right. I think you need to get that push from the analytics group saying, here's what's possible. Now it's up to you, category team, to figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah. I know that you're doing some great things in analytics, and that's actually what I want to deep dive into a little bit more today. But just for the for listeners and for, I guess, context, analytics can often mean different things to different people. I just wondered what analytics itself means to you, in the context of your COE.
I would say in its simplest form, it's really taking internal and external data to gain insights about your business and to uncover opportunities. We really see it as a progression from taking a mass amount of data, turning that into information, and then really taking that information, turning it into relevant insights, and then taking those relevant insights and turning them into action and or opportunity. So that's really how we see the progression. And it varies by category. Each category is going to have a little different approach as to what internal and external data is available. But ultimately, that's how we view analytics.
How do you hire for that group? Or maybe a step back, what are the kind of capabilities you look for? Because I'm imagining you're looking for something very specific because it's something that doesn't necessarily exist within the category teams, or at least it doesn't exist at scale. So are you looking for data scientists, or is there some other kind of skill set that you look at to fill out that team with?
Yeah, that's a good point. We're not looking for folks that are typical procurement professionals moving over to the analytics group. I think it's a different skill set. And for us, the most critical piece was getting the leader in the group that really understood the mission, understood what we were trying to go after. I think it took a unique individual where it was a clean slate, right? They were basically handed a blank piece of paper and said, we want to go from A to B. We're not exactly sure how to get there. And now you've got to get the right people in place and formulate the right thoughts to get us there. We have hired quite a few folks with engineering backgrounds, mathematics backgrounds, very few people with what you would call a typical procurement track. But with that said, we also see this group as a very good feeder into the other functions within procurement. You bring someone into analytics, it's really a great way to very quickly understand the business and very quickly become almost an expert within multiple categories, where if the career path they choose is into a category type role, it's a much easier transition. So we've really tried to develop it where there's two distinct career paths within analytics: the folks that live and die analytics and want a career path that stays there, and folks that want to get into procurement. And we see analytics, if they have the right mindset and the right mental capability, it's a really good starting point to learn the business and then eventually go into the category realm if that's what they prefer.
Yeah, they can learn some of the fundamentals, and it allows you a stream of talent from outside, because I know that's one of the problems we all have is how do we identify folks who have some of the capabilities we need going forward to bring them into the business. So it's a good way of being able to do that.
And that's a great point. When we initially hired for this group, we really looked at not just at skill sets, but at what types of companies that we felt did this fairly well or had some unique processes that could really fit what we were trying to do, and we were able to bring folks in from those backgrounds. So, we have folks from the transportation space, folks from IT space, and so on, to really get a wide range of past experiences that they could bring best practices to us.
And does the team support both direct and indirect team? Because I think analytics is often considered the realm of direct procurement, and not that many indirect procurement organizations think as deeply about analytics, in my experience.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we use this group for both direct and indirect. The process and the sources of data are different to some degree, but we've seen very similar outcomes in both. And I think specific to indirect, what deploying analytics has really done for us is it's allowed us to take categories that we deemed as unaddressable in the past and address them. And I think one example we're pretty proud of, and something that was very unique for us, was we looked at our external auditing fees. And that was something we always viewed as unaddressable from a procurement standpoint. We deployed analytics on it. They went and looked at public information that's available, built a should cost model on what we should be paying for external audit based on the complexity, the size, and so on of our business. And we're able to identify a multi-million-dollar opportunity that was executed on. We saved the business the money on something that we had never touched before. So I think it really showed us the power of analytics, not just to incrementally gain more value in the categories you've touched before, but open new doors that were never opened in the past.
So how would you go about building a should cost model then? And I guess this is relevant for both direct and indirect. I think indirect is a little bit more understood, but certainly in indirect, often you don't really know where to start.
So here was it was some analytics and some brute force. There was a lot of work done looking through the financial disclosures of hundreds of publicly traded companies specific to the consumer products industry, looked at what their percentage of revenue was on their external audit fees, which again is all public information, then ran regression analysis on the different inputs to understand what should we be paying based on what the rest of the market is showing they're paying for these fees. And we realized that one, just independently, Newell and Jarden were overpaying for their audit fees, but when you put the business together, it said there was even a more massive opportunity there to go negotiate. And I think it goes back to the power of data. You know, you sit down with your provider and you walk them through the data you're looking at. It's very difficult to come back with a counter argument when there's public knowledge out there that says that we've got a pretty good story here. So I think that's a good example of areas that we can touch that we couldn't before, just based on the way that we've built this group.
Yeah, you mentioned just then about, you know, it's hard to push back on it when you're using the supplier's own data and presenting it back to them. You know, how did they react?
Like we'd hoped. There really wasn't much they could do other than acknowledge the fact that, you know, that with the scale of our new company, yes, this makes sense, and the offer changed drastically when they saw the amount of information we had and the negotiating power we had due to that information.
Yeah, I think to Ben's point, and the audit is an example, but just the negotiation fact pack type technique that we leverage our analytics teams to arm our category managers with going into negotiations and conversations with our suppliers provides the category managers with the information advantage, right? And it's something that I believe is such a critical part of any negotiation, but one that without a team building out these models and thinking in this way, you may not be able to get to. And you know, that information advantage may be, you know, key cost drivers and what's influencing the price. You know, it's really having a deep understanding of what's going on in the market and how that has an impact. And oftentimes we find ourselves going into conversation almost knowing more about what's going on than the suppliers themselves, right? Because we're analyzing so many data points that in some cases the individual you're interacting with doesn't know as much. And you know, it's such a powerful thing to have an information advantage, and it's something that is led by the analytics team.
You know, as a former category lead and you know, sourcing lead, there's often no way that you can spend the time on getting that data yourself. So even though you know that all that data would be useful, one, you don't necessarily know where to go and get it, and two, you just don't have the time to actually find it out, and so you end up in negotiations that, you know, you think are market driven, but they're market driven by the participants rather than by yourself.
Yeah, it's incredible that, you know, since we've committed to analytics as a capability and as a function, as we build data and it builds upon data that we've had in the past, the snowball effect keeps growing and growing and growing. And as we get more and more data points, our power is growing almost exponentially. And it's exciting to think about, you know, over a 2 or 3 year horizon, the information and insights that we'll have about processing costs. You know, what we didn't know a couple of years ago, we learned today. And then, you know, 2 years from now, what have we done with that information, and what sort of enhancements do we have to our understanding of just how the whole supply chain operates? It's all housed in this mega repository of analytical work that we've been doing, and it really does snowball and give us a leg up. And then, you know, our goal, right, is to get so far ahead of our competition with this sort of capability that it then becomes a distinct competitive advantage from a procurement perspective.
And that's something that we try and pursue. I mean, that's the holy grail, isn't it, for procurement? How can what we do become a competitive advantage as opposed to just helping manage a process or even just help buying a few things a little bit better? When you do something like this, it really sets you apart. And what's interesting, you know, you said about the time it takes. It's not necessarily something, by the sounds of it, that it compounds on itself. You know, so yes, there'll be benefit on day one, but there'll be even greater benefit on day 90 and even greater benefit on year 3. And it's even harder once you've got that head start for anybody else to catch up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other piece, John, the audit one was one example, and we have many more where we've really told this team, I think it's a cliche, but try everything, right? Don't be constrained by how things operated in the past. And it's okay to fail in this regard because it's all internal, right? You're not failing externally, you're failing internally. And so, we've told the team, try things, and they're not all going to work. But we really need to get different results. We need to think differently, and that's really the charter of this group: is don't do anything the way we did in the past. Figure out a new way and a better way to go about it, and how do you use data to accomplish that?
Right. You mentioned a couple of different tools that you used. I think negotiation fact packs were one, and the should cost modeling another. I just wonder if there's any other examples of how you're actually applying this data to helping then the category leads, the buyers, the sourcing leads actually deliver and negotiate better outcomes.
Yeah, it's where as an organization, I shared all the brands and all the products that we participate in, and one of the common things that results from that is an immense amount of complexity, and it's not unique. It's like many companies. Newell Brands has a lot of SKU complexity driven by a multitude of configurations created over time, and this exists across many of our brands, but what we found is that complexity can make it difficult to assess the value of one configuration versus the other. So, if we have a set of 1 versus a set of 3 or a set of 12, and obviously it grows out quite a lot from there, are we getting the right value? And for one of our brands, we did some work. We deployed a linear pricing performance model to identify the value of minimizing the variability of existing pricing. And, we took our cost versus quantity. And by doing that work, we uncovered an incredible 6.5% savings before any sort of negotiation, just leveraging the information and normalizing pricing using the linear pricing performance model. I view this almost as free money. It's something that the supplier can't argue with because they're already charging us the price today. It's just distorted by different configurations, and we're able to go out there and normalize that price. It's the strongest negotiation position because all you're saying is, well, you're already charging me that today. I just want the same price across everything, regardless of configuration. And that linear pricing performance model in a very SKU complex environment, which so many companies operate within, is a great way to take that complexity out and normalize it.
Do you get detailed cost breakdowns from your suppliers, or have you got historical cost breakdowns where you can pick out, cost element performance? And I asked that, I mentioned before I was in India for a year. I was actually building a center of excellence for procurement, but this was back 10 years ago. And we wanted to focus a lot on knowledge-based and analytics and cost estimating, should cost modeling. And so we would be able to pull out historical cost breakdown information for a supplier and show how they're basically have different assumptions based on who filled the form in, and use that as a way of doing exactly what you said, kind of sharing this. You're actually charging us this here, then we should be able to apply that to everything. And I wonder if that's kind of one of the sources of data that you're able to use to pull that kind of information.
It varies. I think our supply base is similar to most, where you have some suppliers that are very transparent, and you'd have what you'd call kind of quote-unquote open book pricing. You have others that are less transparent. And so our way of getting around that has really been through another one of the tools being the should cost modeling. Really, rather than having the suppliers tell us what their cost breakdown is, us telling them what it should be. And by doing that, two things happen. One, you're either right and you've got a really strong negotiating stance, or you're wrong and they are forced to explain to you why you're wrong. And in doing that, you've just gained a whole lot of valuable information to use with other suppliers, other categories, or the next time around in negotiation. So it's a very iterative process where we may get it wrong, but even so, you're learning a whole lot in that process, and you're going to take that and use it in your next negotiation.
Yeah. How are you able to capture all this data? So you building a knowledge base, because it sounds like you have a tremendous amount of information, and you're obviously adding to that all the time. How do you collect it in a way that it's then usable?
Yeah, I think if we look at are opportunities over time. I think as that data pool grows and grows and grows, I think it's an opportunity where we've still got to build out how we're going to organize it for not just today, which I think we're doing it in a fairly standard way through SharePoints and file folders and those sort of things. But as that scales and snowballs, as I talked about earlier, that's not really the most effective way. And I think it's somewhere where we're looking at our technology roadmap and deciding where we can deploy tools most effectively, and managing information is a big part of that technology roadmap. So we're thinking about it. It's not something we have a perfect solution to today, but as we look at things we want to solve for going forward with technology, I think this is one of those areas where it ensures we get the most value out of it.
To really lever the data that you have access to as you gather more and more and more information.
Yeah, it's if you have a lot of information but you can't access it readily, or you can't organize and sort it easily, it becomes so much less valuable. I think when we've got it top of mind and we've not had a lot of turnover and the people are familiar with the information, that's maybe less important. But as you flash forward a couple of years and some of those dynamics change, you can't rely on those aspects as being the reason for how you organize your data. So we're going to try and get ahead of that, so that we don't get into a position where we have lots of good stuff, but it's not usable.
Right. I have a question about data sources. So, you talked a little bit about public information, I think, in the audit example. You talked about using information that you have already internally, just through the course of business. Where would you say that most of your data comes from? Are you buying it, or is it really information that you're able to access relatively cheaply?
I think it's really everywhere, right? I think depending on what question we're trying to answer will define what sources of data we need to go gather. I'm thinking to a recent example where we were assessing a very unexpected market constraint. We went on a category that we were less familiar with what was going on. We leveraged our analytics team to do a global assessment of market capacity constraints, who the customers are, who the buyers are. And we went out there and we bought syndicated data to do that assessment and complete that assessment. We felt that was our quickest, it was a function of time. It was a function of how much knowledge we had and the availability of that data. That being the case, there's other areas where I think we have a lot of internal expertise. That Ben's area is one of those areas where I don't think we would necessarily go external for information. I don't know whether you want to share more on that.
Yeah, I think that I would say to generalize, on the indirect side, there's a lot more value to external data. We find a lot of use in benchmarking and percentage of total spend or revenue spent in X category. A lot of that information is out there on the indirect side, and we use that to benchmark ourselves against our peer set. I think to John's point, on the direct side, it's a lot more internal information. You're obviously looking at commodity price indexes and so on, but also it's your customized products typically that you're talking about.
Driven.
So there really that external data out there to lead you. It's really more internal cost breakdowns and looking at value analysis, value engineering. How can I take costs out of components that consumers don't care about and add cost into components that they do, and so on. So it really is split depending on which category and what function you're talking about.
I think it is. It is important not to be cheap when you think about an analytics capability and that group. There's a lot of tools that enable these teams to be successful. I think external data is one of those, and it's not free. So I encourage the team to find the right data and present the need to go buy that data if they need it, as opposed to try and say that we've got a shoestring budget and you've got to create everything yourself. I think that would really limit the ability for an analytics team to be successful if you put really, really tight cost constraints around that team. It goes the same to cost modeling, and buying products and doing should costs and learning about manufacturing processes. Information is power in this area. And, if you put really, really tight cost constraints and you want to do analytics, I think you're going to severely limit your ability to get the outputs that you desire from an analytics commitment.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. And I think my experiences that prompted the question was I've been a part of organizations who, yes, have taken analytics seriously and they've carved out analytics, perhaps within a COE, but then not invested in that team to give them access to the information they need. So then you're still kind of fighting an uphill battle. So you've kind of made the biggest investment, which is in the people, but they weren't willing to invest in getting information, which just kind of hamstrings the whole thing. So I guess it's all about the ROI.
Yeah, and I was going to say before we scare away all the listeners, I don't think we're talking about millions of dollars, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands. But I think to where you were going, it's been a very easy sell on our end because of the return on that investment. And when we look at what our delivery was from a productivity standpoint in the 3 years prior to really embracing analytics versus the 3 years post, we're about 81% higher rate of productivity post making these changes. So it's a very easy sell on the return on investment to say, I'm going to go spend $100,000 on a tool that's going to work when we've shown that that's going to deliver 10x that in value.
No, that's absolutely what I was thinking. Because, you kind of take it on a case-by-case basis, and you can do that at least if there's a budget available or if there's a commitment to being able to do it. If there's no commitment, it's kind of difficult to build the business case. But in my experience, you definitely need it.
When the organization accepted this opportunity and believed in our vision for what analytics could do, we took it and we ran with it in terms of dedicating people and resources and time and money. And we were given the opportunity to prove the value. And to Ben's point, a couple of years later, we saw this incredible return on that investment that we made at that point in time. So it's a leap of faith, but you're not creating a new wheel, right? It's organizations have done it, we've done it. And I think it's a proven way to enhance procurement strategy and one that has an incredible return. We have 13 people today dedicated to analytics within our COE team. So from a resource perspective, it's one of our larger areas of procurement, and we feel that it delivers great value.
Yeah. How do you decide when to get that team involved? Because even though you have 13 resources, which is a good sized team for sure, I'm sure there's still more demand than there is supply. So is there a way you decide whether there's an ROI that category suggests we should get involved from an analytic perspective, or does it just kind of based on who asks for it?
Yeah, we're an interesting organization because we're ever changing. I think it's kind of, I'm very comfortable in that state because it's always looking for that opportunity for improvement. But the way that we're organized today is, from a COE and analytics standpoint, is that we're aligned with the category team structure. So, there's folks who are supporting the categories and from an analytical standpoint. So the integration from a category standpoint is quite natural. And I think that the teams view analytics as an extension of their teams and part of delivering the results. Now, I say that and I make it sound really, fluffy and everything's working perfectly. To Ben's point, there's absolutely friction and there's room for improvement. But, organizationally, we view these groups as collaborative and responsible for delivering the results. And we've kind of created a structure that are mirrors of each other in order to align those resources accordingly.
Yeah, so they're not in complete conflict in terms of their goals and their objectives and what they're trying to achieve.
And we always look to try and reinvent ourselves, whether it's in this area or any other areas, to make sure that the way that we're aligning creates the most productive structure for delivering results. And I think there's not a fear of reinventing ourselves. If 6 months from now or a year from now we feel like there's going to be a better way to organize and align to maximize the value or return on our people or our teams, we'll do that, right? And we don't view change as a reflection that we've done something wrong in the past, but it's a way to do more in the future.
Right. It's just learning and evolution.
Sure.
So what is next then? I've heard a lot about predictive analytics, but I haven't honestly really seen any real world examples. Is this something you're looking into? Is this something you think you can help to grow the capabilities of the team? I'm interested because I think you're pretty advanced in terms of what you are doing. So I'm just interested if predictive is on your horizon.
Yeah, I think it is in a sense that as we build out our information base and our pool of information, our ability to go out there and do predictive analytics continues to improve. I think good data, and a lot of it is so key to being able to do that. So I think we're getting there from that standpoint. Many of the tools we're looking at and working with are starting to talk about incorporating predictive analytics and machine learning capabilities. And as I talked about earlier, as we build out the technology roadmap, we're trying to find areas where we can unlock those two things. But, I think we're well on the way to establishing the base of information in order to deploy predictive analytics. In certain areas like risk management, we utilize tools that have algorithms that predict failure. But, when we get into core procurement, like you said, it's a bit uncharted. And I kind of exciting to think that, maybe in a year or two, we'll have enough data to be able to go out there and do something that I think really sits as in that category of predictive analytics.
Right. Yeah. I hear about it all the time. I read about it all the time as if it's something that's simple and straightforward. And it's like, this is everything. This is something that all procurement organizations should be doing, but it's just not that simple, I don't think. And the fact, expecting an organization to go in from a standing start to start thinking, okay, how can I use predictive is just completely unreasonable. It just shows that the level of kind of investment you need to have in getting good data that you're doing just as a foundation for doing something more, I think suggests that we're still a long way off across the entire procurement function of really being able to truly lever predictive, other than doing it on a spot basis. Like you said, risk management, I think, is a good one, but that's more one specific use case rather than using predictive across everything that we do.
Yeah, it's so intriguing, but yeah, you're kind of predicting in a lot of cases the two unpredictable players within a situation. So I think it's quite different than how it's been deployed within risk or within the financial community, in that maybe one portion of the equation is static. And, in the case of a, predictive analytics for negotiation, it's very hard to wrap my mind around the data that would feed a really valuable prediction there. It's complicated, but that's also what I think makes it so intriguing, is that I know that the solution is forthcoming, and at some point, hopefully, we put ourselves in a position to be able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, because you've got all that data that you can actually feed into it at that point. So this is really a fascinating topic, and I think it's one that could probably take a lot more time I know there are other things that you're doing from a use case example, but as we start to think about wrapping up, I'm just really interested in your perspective, having, you're on a journey that's obviously been a maturing journey. A lot of procurement leaders perhaps not as advanced. Where should they start if they're thinking about wanting to increase their analytic capabilities?
I would say start with the basics, but with a continuous improvement mindset. Right? I don't think the work is ever done, but I also don't think that you can start from day one incorporating every tool that's available within the toolbox of analytics. So what we found being most effective, like I said earlier, was getting the right people with the right mindsets in the role and then really starting to get as dynamic and as real time as possible. I think we're talking the future on predictive analytics, but it's not out of the realm of possibility to get to the point very quickly where you can make decisions and react much quicker to changing market conditions. And I would say that's what we found as really the first step, and the first benefit we saw was just purely knowing when was the right time to go after negotiations, go after money that we felt was sitting on the table based on changing market conditions. I'd say prior to having an analytics group, it could take until the next negotiation cycle, which could be 6 to 9 months down the road. Post-developing analytics, at least having a more real-time view on what's happening, we were executing those negotiations within 1 to 2 months. So the value we're really bringing to the organization is the speed at which we're recovering that value and ensuring that we're staying competitive relative to the marketplace. So that's what I would say. We didn't go day one getting into the regression analysis and the linear price modeling. We started with what does our spend mapping look like? Do we understand how our costs are built? What inputs do we need to understand more to get that baseline knowledge that you then build off of?
No, just from what you said, I think you got to start somewhere, and also I think you look at the basics, but then how do you evolve it? I think is really important. And a lot of organizations I've worked with will invest, for example, in spend analytics and get spend data and get some insight into the spend and think that that's it. They've done everything that they need. They have all the information they want, when really that's just the start of things. I know we have to wrap up. So just one very last question. Hopefully this is the easy question for the day. If listeners would like to connect with you, maybe if they'd like a little bit more information, where can they find you?
Sure. Well, a couple ways. First, we'll be discussing this topic in more detail at the Procurement Direct conference in San Diego in August. So we'd love to meet some folks there and talk more on this topic. And then also we can be reached at any time on LinkedIn, Ben Szostek and Jonathan Grant. We'd love to hear from folks and really talk about how can the procurement function continue to evolve and continue to add value. And we'd be very open and very interested in talking to folks who are interested in the topic.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll link up to your LinkedIn details, also to the Procurement Direct conference. I'll put those in the show notes for today. That's going to be at artofprocurement.com/Newell Brands. That's artofprocurement.com/Newell Brands. So just Ben, John, I really appreciate you sharing your journey with us. I think that it's something that is it's a topic that I think we need to invest a lot more in from a procurement function to kind of take back control of some of those conversations. And you provided such a great example of your journey, and I think given some inspiration to how you can take small steps but build on them over time. It gives you a lot more kind of access to data than what you may have today. So thank you very much for sharing your journey and for joining me on today's Art of Procurement.
Philip, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.